Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
Hey there. If you're a dietitian and you're trying to fulfill your continuing education requirements, be sure to check out my free CEU activities. I have nearly 3 years worth of free CEUs you can receive by listening to my podcast. I also have a CEU package on sale for 1 year's worth of continuing education credits, which offers the convenience of taking only one quiz and receiving one certificate for all 15 credits. Simply go to my website at soundbitesrd.com/free CEUs for all the details. Hello again. This is part 2 of my conversation with Milton Stokes. On this episode, we will discuss 3 different surveys conducted by the International Food Information Council with insights on snacking, sodium, and sweeteners. But be sure to tune into part 1 to hear all about IFIC's new science communication guide. Enjoy the show. So let's talk about snacking first. This report was in August of 2024. I'd love to hear some, key takeaways. I would start off by saying, why did you even study snacking? Is it becoming more prevalent? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, sure, Melissa. Thank you. And I also want to remind the listeners, I think some of your listeners are dietitians and they know IFIC, but there may be consumers or others who are not completely familiar with our organization. So we do all types of consumer research. We have our huge food and health survey that happens annually. We've done that for 19 years. This year, 2025, will be the 20th anniversary of the survey. So that's a big, big undertaking. We also do monthly, what we call spotlight surveys or pulse type surveys. They're shorter, 10 questions, not a lot of real estate. We have to quickly get right to the point of what we're interested in. And so that's what we have here is we've got one on snacking and we've got a couple of others that I think we're going to talk about as well. So just with that foundation, Melissa, you'd asked what was the motivation, I think, around IFIC doing this snacking survey. And that takes us back to why I was just spending a second talking about the food and health survey. Because when we did the food and health survey in 2024, what we learned is that 74% of Americans, they tell us that they're snacking at least once a day. And just over half, 56%, they say that they're replacing traditional meals with snacking or by eating smaller meals, mini meals, for example. So what we're thinking, and others would agree, is that snacking is becoming, if it hasn't already, it's becoming its own eating pattern. And I would say, and you might agree, Melissa, snacking or mini meals, small frequent meals, it's been around for as long as I've been a dietitian. And I did a quick Google search earlier because I knew that I had covered this topic for Men's Health magazine. So 20 years ago, I was writing about this and it must have been popular because my editor assigned it to me at the time. Anyway, so snacking. We wanted to see what consumers, what were they thinking about when it comes to their snacking practices. And we also wanted to focus on snacking because as long as I've been a dietitian, Melissa, it's one of those practices that often gets demonized or criticized. Snacking is going to ruin your dinner. Snacking is going to ruin your diet. Snacking is going to ruin your whatever, fill in the blank. It gets blamed for a lot of things. But we were coming at this as maybe a way to close nutrient gaps and boost diet quality. So just like a regular breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you could use your snack to meet other nutrient needs.
Right.
So that was what was behind our motivation and how we were approaching this.
And what are consumers looking for in snacks?
We found a few things that were interesting. I know we're just going to maybe go through some of the highlights of these surveys, but we do post all of these results, all of the reports in full on our website, which I know you'll probably provide in the show notes, foodinsight.org.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so when you ask about what they're looking for, probably no surprise. Consumers mostly want something that's sweet and then salty when it comes to their snacks. They also want something that they think is healthy and portable. So maybe it's on the go, it's easy, doesn't require a lot of fuss. And then their favorite food group for snacking is fruit. And I think that ties back nicely to this idea of portability. I think it ties back to what we were talking about just a moment ago around diet quality and filling nutrient gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how many people in America probably have some sort of fruit bowl or fruit that's out on their counter, and it's easy and it's sweet. So it checks a lot of boxes for them. So fruit got a nod in our survey.
I love that.
Yes.
What other opportunities are there to leverage snacking for better nutrition? Like, how can we help make it more of a focus of filling those nutrient gaps? And earlier you said people want something healthy,
Right.
but then I thought you were going to follow up, but also indulgent.
Yeah. Well,
They want it all.
They want it all, and they do want indulgent, and that's okay too. There's room for that in the diet. But when it comes to this survey, just a couple of things that stood out for us. When I was in private practice and when I was working with clients, I noticed that as the day progressed, diet quality often went down.
Yeah.
And why is that? Is it because people are tired? Is it because they are rushed? Is it because they didn't get to the grocery yet? So they just kind of have to grab whatever they have at home? Are they making some of their decisions that aren't planful and mindful? And I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But in the survey, what we saw is for snacking, diet quality does decline, or at least this is what consumers tell us. It does decline as the day goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one, I think, salient point to think about. Maybe after dinner, what's going on in the snacking department? And do we need to make any nudges or suggestions or help set consumers up for a little bit more success there?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, Melissa, that we saw is most people, they tell us that they snack spontaneously. 2 out of 3 people, they snack whenever the urge strikes.
Mm.
And that makes sense to me. I mean, I work from home, and so the kitchen is downstairs from my home office, and I don't plan what time I'm going to eat a snack. I wait until I feel like, maybe I'll go grab a banana, or I'll grab some raisins and some almonds.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe what we could do then with these couple of findings is think more about guidance on healthy portable snacks. I know there are a lot of resources on that. And even at IFIC, we've got tips and advice on our website. But Melissa, those were just a couple of the big takeaways from that spotlight survey on snacking.
Very interesting. I love that the favorite snack is fruit. I did not know this. I'm very encouraged to hear this. I'm always saying on the podcast that 9 out of 10 people are not getting enough fruit and vegetable.
Right. If you think about where we are in terms of diet quality, and nearly nobody in the United States gets enough fruits and vegetables, it's like, maybe the stars are aligning,
Mm-hmm.
and we could somehow take advantage of that, when we're planning and advising clients and patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And a piece of advice that dietitians tend to give people that aligns with what you're saying is, yeah, it makes sense that maybe you don't plan, at 2:00, I'm going to have a snack and this is what I'm going to have, like you would maybe plan a meal.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes sense to kind of have that intuitive, I'm feeling a little hungry now. One day that might be at 1:00, one day that might be at 4:00, right? But to have like a list of ideas
Mm-hmm.
and make sure you have those things from the grocery store on hand so that when hunger strikes and when the urge to snack strikes, you can have some healthy options to pick from. Like, I'm feeling something salty and crunchy this time. I want something sweet. And you have options available.
I love that, Melissa. I try to practice that myself and try to teach that to my kids.
Yeah.
Like a lot of kitchens, we have an island in our kitchen. It's got a bunch of bananas on it, but it's on the other side of the island. And so when I come into the kitchen, I don't always look all the way at the end. I just look at the front. So what did I do this morning? I grabbed a banana and I moved it over to the front. So at least it's there. So even what I'm trying to say is even me, even though I know nutrition and I know what I should be doing, even me, I need to like nudge myself and help myself. Mm-hmm. And to your point around preparation, I still like to prepare as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to share one of my recent wins in the snacking department.
Ooh, please.
Growing up, we always had like a candy drawer, but we sort of have a candy cabinet. And what's nice is it's sort of, out of sight, out of mind. But when you have a craving, you know where to go.
Yes.
So we'd always open that cabinet and see what was there. And I don't know, one day I got the idea to put my canister of raisins there. I'm like, well, can't hurt for me, my son, whatever. And I can't tell you 9 out of 10 times when I open that cabinet, you know what? Raisins are going to do the trick for me right now. Like I was surprised that it was that big a deal.
Yeah, when you want a little something sweet and chewy, and
Yeah.
it's perfect. Love raisins.
Well, let's talk about the sodium survey. This report was in July of 2024. What was of interest that you'd like to share with us?
Well, if we back up just a little bit, back to the Food and Health Survey, and I know you're very familiar with the survey, Melissa, but just in case others are not, we always ask about drivers for food and beverage choices. What motivates you? What are you looking for? Why did you choose what you've chosen? And time again, the number one reason is taste.
Yeah.
And number two is price. I get it. People want to enjoy their food, and then they want to be able to pay for it. So that doesn't surprise me. I'm sure that doesn't surprise you.
Right.
I will say, I think it does call into question some of the frequent focus that I see on nutrient content. What's the nutrient of the day, the vitamin, the mineral, whatever. Is it vitamin D? What is it right now that everybody's gaga over?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, people don't make their food decisions solely on nutrition. We don't eat nutrients, right? We eat food, and we want to enjoy what we eat, and we want to be able to pay for it. And so that's what we've seen time and time again from Food and Health. But sodium, that's one of those nutrients that's like, okay, salt, it adds to the flavored experience, but also, for some people who may be salt sensitive, there are blood pressure issues, and it's a nutrient / ingredient. And I keep saying it, that way because we focused on both in the survey. It's something that is getting a lot of attention, I think in large part because FDA, Food and Drug Administration, issued some voluntary reduction targets that the food industry is working through, and I think making some progress there. There was some recent report outs, and your health professional listeners are probably following it a little more closely. So that was a long way of answering your question, or sort of setting up why we focused on sodium and salt.
I know that salt provides some function in foods other than taste, but I read some interesting takeaways in the survey that I hadn't thought much about before. So how else does sodium impact our eating experience?
There's the obvious, the salty perception. And some people like to say they have a salt tooth. I joke that I have a salt tooth. But when it comes to salt, it's not just about that salty perception. It also brings out sweetness, and it reduces bitterness, for example. Salt even plays a role in food safety.
Yeah.
So it's one of these ingredients, or sodium, if we're talking just about a nutrient. Yes, we love it. Yes, we consume too much of it. But no, we can't just take it all out of the food supply tomorrow.
Right.
And we got a lot of questions from even dietitians who said, why can't we just do what XYZ country has done with salt? Why can't we just get rid of it, like snap our fingers? Well, no, there's a much larger story there, and a lot of it gets to food safety and preservation. So I think salt is an interesting and complicated area in the food supply. And we had an educational webinar on this, Melissa, where we featured food scientist Mario Ferruzzi. Excellent content, background, education. So strongly recommend to your listeners to check that out.
Okay, great. I'll link to that. Well, I remember when I worked for the Dairy Council, I was there from 2003 to 2011. And I remembered learning about trying to reduce the sodium in cheese. And you can only go to a certain point because of the functionality of it and the preservation. This is very, very interesting. Yes, we are consuming too much versus the recommended amount.
Right.
What are some of the top sources of sodium?
The average intake, by the way, is around 3,400 milligrams, and our upper limit should be at 2,300. So we are consuming too much. And the American Heart Association, they've got an even more, I'll say, strict target of 1,500 milligrams. So just about everybody, about around 9 out of 10 adults, is having too much sodium in our diets. And it's everywhere. It's in whole foods. It's in packaged foods. It's in so many things where you may not expect it. And it may be because it's naturally occurring.
Something like bread. I remember when I was a clinical dietitian and people on trying to get that 1,500 milligrams of sodium, they had to have special bread.
Yeah. Yes. And it's just everywhere. I think the good news, I think the food industry has done an amazing job with innovating and offering options. And I just think about like canned foods, for example. We just bought some canned corn and it was salt-free. And like, okay, great. We're going to use that in a Tex-Mex dish, which has already got enough salt in it. I don't need extra salt from this canned corn. So yes, sodium and salt pretty widely distributed. And you'd asked about top sources from not our own research, but just from our literature review. We found that sandwiches, rice, pasta dishes, other grain-based mixed dishes, those are among the top sources of sodium. Packaged food in general, that accounts for more than 70% of the sodium. And when it comes to, well, what are people doing at home? What are they adding while they're cooking or during eating? And that's about 11% of the sodium. So that just gives kind of a snapshot of how it shows up in the diet.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I always wanted to help my patients and clients understand is what's coming from the salt shaker is important, but it's kind of just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
So if they're like, oh, I'll just cut back a little bit on what I'm using from the salt shaker, there's a whole other category here that might give you a better impact if you knew where that sodium was.
Yeah. And if we think about what the FDA is trying to help us do industry-wide, on a much larger scale, if we can all make some gradual cuts, if we can step it back little by little, it's possible to retrain our preferences. And, if we can take more of a deliberate approach to reducing salt and sodium across the board, it's a way of resetting preference. And just an anecdote. So I've been making little changes around the house. I do most of the cooking. And so I've been making changes at dinner, for example. Well, we were out to dinner as a family after seeing a show in New York, and we went to an Italian restaurant. And the food was really salty. It was like, whoa, did somebody make a mistake? Or have we just all changed our preference around here? But the takeaway is my daughter, she was pretty upset. She said that I ruined eating out for her because of how I'm cooking at home. So I take that as a win, actually.
I take that as a compliment, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, thank you very much. What else can I do for you? I do think it's possible to change our preference. And I think that, FDA is helping the industry rally around that.
This is not a sodium related story, but it totally reminds me of when my daughter went off to college. She texted me. She was like, you've ruined guacamole for me because anything else that I've eaten that's not yours is, I don't even know how they can call it guacamole.
Oh my gosh.
I was so proud.
Oh, that's nice.
Well, I did a hypertension, blood pressure related episode that I'll link to in my show notes as well. So
yeah, that's great.
Well, let's wrap up with the Sweeteners survey. And this we can just do very top line. I've done several related episodes to Sweeteners, and I know that IFIC has been looking at this topic for a long time as well. So why did you study this? And I know Sweeteners were in the news pre and post of your survey, if I'm saying that correctly. So explain that to us.
Yeah, I think, Melissa, you're right that sweeteners are one of those evergreen topics. Consumers are interested in. It can be contentious. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation around sweeteners. So it's one of the areas that IFIC has focused a lot of its consumer research on. We include it in the Food and Health Survey, so that larger survey vehicle that we have annually. And then we also performed a special spotlight survey, and my colleague Chris Sully, he led that work. Just a couple of the takeaways as I scanned that report. Public sentiment about the safety and the healthfulness of sweeteners or low and no calorie sweeteners, the sentiment is low. So I think there's a lot that could be done to help enhance what's known and to talk about the safety and how we know what we know about these tools in the diet. The other thing that I'd say is that certain sweeteners, they do have a little bit of a halo. So stevia and monk fruit, that sentiment or that perception gets more points from consumers when compared to other types of low and no calorie sweeteners. Is it the provenance of those sweeteners? Do they have some sort of perception boost because they're perceived to be natural, for example. There's some interesting questions that I think we could ask and answer around those sweeteners. The third thing I'd say, Melissa, there are no magic bullets. We're always looking for what's the next great thing. And I say we kind of universally as a people. What's the next great thing that can be added to the diet? Or what can you do to revolutionize your health and maximize your longevity and your well-being, et cetera, et cetera? Well, sweeteners, they're not a magic bullet. They are a tool, and you can use them if you're looking to cut sugar and calories from sugar, for example. But if you don't want them, if you don't think they fit your diet, then there's absolutely no reason that you should be using them. It's a totally personal preference. But I would land on inviting and asking for more of a productive public discourse on low and no calorie sweeteners, just broadly. I think dietitians are the ones poised to lead it. We just have to be mindful that maybe we have a preference about a sweetener, or we think should not be part of our diet. Okay, well, whatever we think, let's park that for a little bit and let's look at the science and safety and see what regulatory authorities are saying, et cetera, et cetera. So those are just some quick high points from the work on sweeteners that IFIC has done.
Thank you. Yes. And as you mentioned, you have all this information on the foodinsight.org site, and I will include the links to those specific surveys. But of course, I do encourage people to check out all the resources on your site.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll link to those related episodes that I have as well. And I just always have to put my plug in as a dietitian and a diabetes educator. I just really appreciate having low and no calorie sweeteners available for people to use in their diets.
What tool?
Yeah, it's a tool. It's one of many tools, and we need all the tools we can get. So as we're wrapping up, what are some parting words and, where people can find more information, maybe mentioning the Science Communication Guide again?
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I said this when we started the conversation, Melissa, but I do want to say it again. I love your podcast. I think you do a great service to the profession of dietetics and healthcare providers more broadly. You have amazing programming, and you bring the science on all the main hot topics and contentious topics. So your podcast is a wonderful starting point for people. And so just congratulations to you, and thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Of course. Some parting words. Is it possible that we can practice listening a little bit more? And maybe if I'm speaking to my dietitian peers, maybe we can ask more questions of our clients and patients and consumers and the customers that we're serving. Maybe if we ask more questions, it can help us connect on values. And then we can build a relationship that is a little bit stronger, and it can give our profession a boost in terms of its credibility. I would say asking questions, listening and questions is something that can't be underemphasized. And I even remind myself as much as possible, okay, you're presenting me with this contentious fact, or you're presenting me with this wild sounding information. What can I ask about the information? How can I dig a little deeper? So I feel like that's something we can all practice. The other thing is, I'd say maybe we need to ask permission more when we're providing advice, instead of just like blasting people with everything we know or giving them the education of what they should be doing. Let's ask and try to get to a point of understanding, are they really ready to learn? And I mentioned that one because I recently read this book, Melissa, called Super Communicators. And the author made a point of saying, when someone has presented you with some information or appears to be in need, it's not a bad idea to say, do you want a hug? Do you want to be heard, or do you want to be helped? And I'm not thinking we use that exact language, but I do use it with my family all the time now since reading that book, because I jump into this like, let me solve your problem mode. I love problems, and I love strategizing, and I love coming up with the tactics to get the thing done. But maybe that's too heavy-handed. And so just circling back to listening, asking questions, and then, getting permission. I would say, based on the answer to some of those questions, maybe we need to be willing to keep our own counsel, keep our advice to ourselves just for a little bit, because people may not be ready to change or learn or take on the new information. Something I've learned from you, I quote you all the time on the headlines, not the bottom line. And when it comes to the busy food nutrition landscape, when it's lots of headlines that seem so wild and crazy, if the message, if a headline, if an artifact angers you, what's the messenger's motivation? Are they trying to get more clicks, likes? Are they trying to sell you something? Do they want you to sign up for whatever subscription? There can just be a lot of food nutrition challenges that we can't convey the bottom line in a snappy, provocative headline all the time.
Right.
So ask yourself, what are you feeling? And then the very last thing I think I'll say, Melissa, is if we are too married to our ideas and our convictions, maybe we're going to miss something. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could be a little more open to a new idea or something that's not in alignment with what we understand. Maybe it's an opportunity to consider changing our minds. I mean, how often do we change our minds about anything? Mm-hmm. I think about that question a lot. Like, when's the last time I changed my mind on something?
Remember Tamar Haspel asked that question in, was it the movie Fed Up?
Oh, she did?
Yeah. When's the last time you changed your mind?
I never saw that movie.
It's like, oh, wow. Yeah. But for people who aren't recognizing her name, she's a journalist with the Washington Post. And I actually had her on the podcast years ago. So
she's a great source of information for sure. Mm-hmm. Thanks for the chance to just share a few closing thoughts. And your listeners can find more information about IFIC foodinsight.org. That's where we post our research reports. You can get our webinars through IFIC.org. We're at the websites, and then we're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook as well.
Yeah, and I will have all those links. And I'm also going to put a plug in for my free Sound Science Toolkit if listeners are not familiar with that.
Oh, yes.
I have a lot of the IFIC resources in there, and it's just a curated collection of things about critical thinking, like we were just talking about, and understanding research better, hazard versus risk, all of those thought-provoking topics. Well, Milton, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I could talk to you all day. So this is going to be a little longer episode, but I think it's chock full of helpful information. I'm just so excited about the new science guide that you guys have, and keep up the great work with all the surveys, and stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate it. I love the conversation. Thank you.
All right. And for everybody listening, as always, if you enjoy this episode, share it with your friends, families, colleagues. Tell everybody about the podcast and tune into other episodes. And of course, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. This podcast does not provide medical advice. It is for informational purposes only. Please see a registered dietitian for individualized advice. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Copyright Soundbites Inc., all rights reserved.